My name's Martin Sherlock. I work as knowledge manager in the major projects bit of Highways England, alongside Leslie and Joe. Bit of context and background, then a bit of kind of why we're here, I think. So Highways England is a publicly owned and regulated company. It has one stakeholder, the Secretary of State for Transport. It is regulated by the Office of Rail and Road, and it is also accountable to Transport Focus. We own, maintain, enhance the strategic road network for England only, but it's actually the government's largest asset by size and value. It might just be 2% of the roads in England by length, but we actually carry a third of all road traffic by mileage and 2/3 of heavy goods traffic. So, a significant part of the country's infrastructure. We are just this year moving into a second 5-year delivery programme. So it's called a road investment strategy, which lasts for 5 years. We agree with the Department for Transport and our regulator, and it basically commits us to doing a range of things to maintain and enhance the network. We have got somewhere around 25 billion quid to spend over this 5-year period and a very clear programme to deliver, including a little over 2.3 billion pounds worth of efficiencies over that period. So this is finding better, more efficient or innovative ways to do things that deliver better value for public money. So you can imagine why knowledge management is so important to us. Everything we do is shaped by 3 simple imperatives: customer, safety, delivery, so that we kind of deliver the social and economic impacts the government is looking for. So we have somewhere around 125 major road schemes in different stages of delivery at this point in time, with a pipeline for RIS2 and beyond that in terms of things that we can do. We also look at how we maintain that more efficiently and effectively, and we look at how we add extra value through things like building cycleways alongside new stretches of road network, and putting in environmental measures like bat fences to stop them flying into the sides of lorries. So even though you might just think roads, there's an awful lot more to us than that. Context. So project and program management, which is our raison d'etre and where most of our money and most of our energy goes, is kind of getting much more complicated. So in those areas, we tend to look to and value simplicity and consistency. It's that, can we repeat and refine stuff, get better at it? Can process and guidance systems create a certain world so we know what we're doing and we can nail it all down, not just time, quality and cost, but all the things that sit around that, so we can actually quantify things. That plays very well to the strengths of quite a lot of our staff, who often have civil engineering as well as project backgrounds. The big challenge is that that tends to kind of pay attention to the complicatedness, all the different systems, processes, people, and how they fit together, and we can deliver a degree of certainty from that. Challenge is that the world that we live in, the world that we work in, is full of all kinds of uncertainty, ambiguity, complexity. We can't nail it all down. We can't confirm, define, solve. So the kind of things that involve people, because they never behave quite how you expect them to, which is always fun. The kinds of things that you don't have any control over. So if we think about the future, how will Brexit play out? What impact does that have on our supply chain, our capacity and capability to deliver? What else might happen in the future? At this point in time, we're in the middle of a national pandemic. So there's lots of kind of complex, ambiguous, uncertain things going on that we can't control. So my interest here, really, particularly when I kind of think back to that 2.3 billion pound efficiencies over the next 5 years, is to think, how can we anticipate the kind of challenges that we're going to face because of that uncertainty, that ambiguity? What kind of tools and responses are going to help us better engage so that we leverage it rather than just respond or react to it? I don't think we really can control it, and we certainly can't ignore it. That doesn't work. So what I've been doing in the blogs that I've been writing, and what I'm interested in kind of talking about today really, is how do we engage with that complexity so that we are better placed to start to think about what we could do differently or better in the stuff that we can control to better engage with, mitigate, exploit the uncertainties. So my starter for 10 really is kind of, how do you see the future and how do you think we should try and engage with it? And I can already see there's a question from John.
Well, for me, it was, I was interested in how do you identify efficiency savings. I thought that was a great one. Especially these days around COVID, I think the financial climate is going to change next year.
Right.
And some money our chancellors had to borrow. I think they're going to be looking for lots more savings. So I was interested in that. That's a real driver, isn't it? An unknown about how much money you're going to get next.
It is a real driver. So the way we're set up, the way the road investment strategy that we sign off works is that we get guaranteed a set amount of money over a 5-year period. And it's roughly 4.5 to 5 billion for each year of the 5-year road investment period that we're just starting. Alongside that, we have that £2.3 billion efficiency target. It's effectively what we're being asked to do is £27 billion worth of work, and we're given £25 billion to do it. So we have to find better ways to do it. Everything that we identified in the first road investment strategy period, so that was 2015 to 2020, we became a government-owned company in 2015. So our structure, our organisation, our culture started to change at that point. Everything that we identified in that first period is now business as usual, so we can't count it. So we identified quite a lot of things that we could do a bit better that would gain us some efficiencies in different ways, shapes and forms. Some of that we learned from the austerity period, where we were asked to kind of try and invest money much more quickly in development that would help the economy. So we found some faster ways to do things. Some of that was about implementing new systems and processes. So over the last 5 years, we've gone from lots and lots of people in lots of teams in lots of buildings, all having lots of Excel spreadsheets in all kinds of places. So, you know, thousands of versions of the truth, whether you're talking about cost, whether you're talking about scheduling, whether you're talking about kind of quality or anything else, trying to see what was really happening was really difficult. Almost all of that is now in systems. So we have things like Primavera, Exactium, Business Collaborator, for example. So part of that has been about improving our systems and our processes in lots of ways. Like lots of larger businesses, we have historically worked quite a lot in silos. So working better across silos and sharing stuff that might have worked in one region, but has not even been shared with other regions. You'd be surprised how many things you can spot and exploit. Why don't you guys do it like this? We've also used quite a lot of lean. So a kind of classic example that we use quite often is looking at the working window for overnight resurfacing. And historically, you'd kind of close the roads typically kind of around midnight, 1 in the morning, sometimes a bit early, depending on what you were doing and where. You'd want to open them again by about kind of 6:30 in the morning, unless it was something long-standing or more complicated. But lining everything up took time. So you might actually only spend about an hour of that road closure overnight resurfacing under the old rules, and you'd spend a lot of time with people just sat around waiting for things to happen. We did quite a lot of work looking at how we can refine that. So that working window has gone from about an hour and a half to about 4.5 hours. And you can do an awful lot more resurfacing overnight in that extended working window than you could under the old rule. So lean has had a real impact on some of our systems and processes, both internally and with our supply chain. What we've also invested in is behaviours. So we spend quite a lot of time looking at how we can behave more collaboratively. Something that we will be leveraging much more in road investment period 2, so 2020 to 25, is we've kind of changed quite a lot of our commercial arrangements as we've evolved. So we've moved from those kinds of contracts typically that we had in maintenance, but also in construction to a degree, where it was, here's a list of things that you need to do to a standard you need to do them to. And it was a bit like those old style job descriptions where you say, okay, so I turn up at 9 o'clock, I answer the phone if it rings, I go to the door if someone comes, I write these letters, I do these tasks. It meant that you ended up with contractors doing things that they were contracted to do that actually didn't have any value. Why would you want people to kind of cut the grass on the verge every 2 weeks in winter when it doesn't grow, for example? That's kind of old style civil service approaches, which we've moved away from gradually, but our new commercial arrangements do the same kind of thing. rather than say we'll reward or punish you depending on what you do, we've said we'll work together and we'll share those rewards and we'll share that pay. So there's an incentive not just amongst us internally in our teams, but also amongst our supply chain to share knowledge more effectively, to identify and implement innovation and solution across the wider integrated team rather than just keep it within the bit of the business that you sit in. So quite a lot of efficiencies we've identified through better working and better behaviour.
And how can I just ask on that point about the suppliers? How do you get suppliers to share information? Because they might consider that their IP. But what do you do to sort of overcome those issues? Because
Well,
that's real on the ground stuff, isn't it?
it is, but that's part of the journey that we're on at this point in time. So we have 3 large construction programs in major projects where I sit, and between them, they spend the bulk of that road investment strategy money. And complex infrastructure is the really big stuff. So Lower Thames Crossing, A14 Cambridge to Huntingdon, Stonehenge. There's a couple more schemes that are moving into complex infrastructure. They're all kind of big, unique, bespoke schemes, and they have bespoke arrangements. And if I look at A14 Cambridge to Huntingdon, the thing that they did up front, so as those teams came together, so it was us and a joint venture and a variety of kind of secondary suppliers, we did a lot of investment on building integrated teams. So we spent a lot of time up front saying, we're one team, we're the A14. We're not, Balfour and Michelle and Atkins and Highways England. We are one team, we're the A14. And some of that was kind of simple practical stuff. So the A14 staff, regardless of who their employer is, all have an A14 email address. They all have access to the same systems on the same platforms. And we invested quite a lot in something called the Behaviour Maturity Framework. So we support and work with our supply chain in a venture called IBIT, which stands for Improving Behaviours, Improving Performance. It's been running about 5-6 years now. It started quite small with a behavioural consultancy and a couple of people with some vision within our organisation who connected with people outside in some of our larger suppliers to say, there are ways that we can stop blaming each other for things that go wrong, that we can stop keeping things to ourselves because we just say commercial confidentiality or intellectual property or something similar to that. We can stop behaving in ways that stop other people learning from our mistakes because we don't want to own up to them. And they did quite a lot of work in those integrated teams looking at the behaviours that encourage collaboration. So how do we take ownership? How do we hold others to account? How do we hold honest conversations with people? That kind of investment is a long-term investment. You don't change behaviours or culture overnight. And when you've got a number of organisations coming together that have different home cultures, it becomes even more challenging. But that investment has really paid off. So there is a wealth of evidence now, both in terms of some of the efficiencies. So very simple efficiencies examples might be around archaeology on the A14 site. So we realized that we were spending a lot of money on archaeology because we were employing professional archaeologists to do everything on the sites that needed to be investigated. And actually what we could do was employ the archaeologists to provide the expertise, the consultants, the advice, make the right decisions at the right point in time, but we can employ a lot of other people to do the fetching and carrying under supervision. So that investment up front on how do we build and encourage and reward collaborative behaviours. So if someone makes a mistake, they feel confident that they can own up to it and ask people for help and input to resolve it, to mitigate it, to do something better next time. That's willingness to start to share information that historically we haven't shared with each other. And as importantly, I think for us as an intelligent client, for us to ensure that we invested as much into changing our own behaviours so that we kind of role model the behaviours we wanted to see in others has allowed us to deliver that construction scheme ahead of schedule to kind of standard and with some real efficiency savings. One point I should say about efficiency savings is that all of our efficiency savings that we claim across any scheme, and not just the kind of the major construction stuff, but also our maintenance activity, our IT upgrades, everything that we claim as an efficiency, we have to have that validated by the Office of Rail and Road. So it's not a given that we just say, oh, well, we've saved X amount of money on this, or we've delivered X amount of more for the amount of money that you gave us. We have to justify that. Everything that Office of Rail and Road have accepted as an efficiency in the first road investment period is now business as usual. So we're looking for new, more demanding, better efficiencies in the future, which is why I started to talk about the commercial arrangements. So A14 was set up very much as a way for all of us within that A14 team to collaborate and work together, and not to be precious about the things where it's important to share. Initially, a lot of that work was done around safety, because the environments that we work in, particularly on site, on road, are dangerous environments. Far too many people suffer injury and death on our network. I know the numbers are low, one of the safest networks in the world, but nonetheless, any death, any serious injury is one too many. So a lot of that initial focus was around safety. We had things like raising the bar. If you spot a better way to do something, which might be about behaviour, or might be about innovation, or might be about sharing, then let's get that out there on a site that all of our supply chain have access to. Let's let all of them know about it. Let's capture case studies so we can know what good looks like in the future. And if that means changes to process or equipment or something else, we can do it. So we led on safety when we looked at that collaborative stuff, because it seemed like a really easy way to start. Everyone can see the benefits because we have a safer working environment. It's safer for everyone. If we can be honest about the stuff that might put people at risk, we can ensure that everyone is likely to go home safe and well at the end of the day. But then kind of looking at how we kind of use those same approaches to building more collaborative behaviours, to getting people to work in integrated teams, it made sense to spread that across to everything else. So if you look at A14, all those organisations involved in delivering the A14 have taken their share of the data we've captured, the successes, the issues that we've had to resolve, the problems that have been difficult. It's not kind of, well, we'll pay you this much and then we'll kind of pay you an extra amount if you do better, or if you do deliver this to this timescale. It's if we'll all gain from this. And some of those gains are not financial. They are about that kind of going home safe and well. They are about finding those better ways to do things. I don't know if the behaviour maturity framework is in the public sector. I don't see why it wouldn't be, but I will check that and I will see if we can share it.
Yeah, excellent. I was going to ask you, I was going to mention that there are a number of questions coming up in the chat, and people should feel free to wave and share a question out loud, or a story or an observation. Al, you wanted to chip in.
Yeah, Jonathan, you know I'm not backwards in coming forward at these things. Just reinforcing some of the things that Martin said, I think really about the sort of the collaborative behaviours, particularly, and also it's a long game. I think efficiencies, particularly, it's very easy to focus on the tangible, but be aware of losing sight of the intangible. So the enablers, such as behaviours and approaches and leadership, that then allow those tangible efficiencies to be actually delivered, maintained. I think that's sort of my sort of first response. And then going back to sort of the broader question of agility and complexity, I think how do we engage with it? How do we deal with it going forward? I think the environment we've operating in has always been complex, and we've always had to maintain a level of agility. I guess my slight caution against some of what Martin said was about how far down the road of embedding things into processes and systems you go, which I think then goes back to making sure you're aligned between. So there's a triangle model that we use. I think probably Jonathan's heard it from me before: system, structures, cultures. You have to tackle all three of those elements congruently if you're going to drive change or whatever that change is, be it delivery or transformation or whatever. So yeah, and there are many people who focus on the behaviours, but then ignore the systems and structures and pick any one of those 3 points. You'll find plenty of people out there who focus on one corner, but you have to tackle all three coherently, I guess, is my main sort of point.
Yeah, excellent, good, thank you. So Martin, did you want to have a look at one or two of the other questions that have been thrown up in the chat?
I was just having a look, actually, and I was kind of listening to what you said, Al. I absolutely agree that there is a kind of balancing act to be had here. And it's very easy for us in organisations that have a history and a bureaucracy to pay attention to one of those points on the triangle rather than try and balance all three of them. So what have we got? Identify and calculate efficiency savings. Well, there's a kind of a mechanism and a process which involves kind of both our shareholder Department for Transport and our regulator signing off on that. Have we used software to create 4D simulation in the pre-construction phase? We are starting to do that. So we're kind of trying out various things. The challenge is that we have huge data sets about our network in terms of the geospatial data. But we are one of our kind of transformation work streams through the second road investment strategy period is looking very much at how we can kind of shift a lot of the kind of early work into that digital space. So we can look for some of the things that otherwise you won't always spot until you're on site. Where's the kind of clash detection going to come in? If we've got options, what do we know about the geography to understand kind of which of those are likely to cause us least pain or have the most beneficial kind of impact on the surrounding environment? So we are definitely starting to do that. It's not something that I paid a lot of attention to other than be kind of fairly impressed by some of the modelling they've done. We also use a lot of drones now for kind of the aerial survey work, which kind of has increased, particularly during social distancing. So yes, we're very interested in that, and our kind of director has made that a real focus because it's a much safer way to do things, but it also identifies a load of things that you can do up front in that digital space before you get out on site.
Yeah, excellent, excellent.
Can I ask just on that point, Jonathan? It's John here. That's interesting about the use of drones. Are you able to say that's also an efficiency saving, that you're not having to get into a helicopter and fly up and over the terrain?
I don't know if it's been claimed as an efficiency saving or not, because I couldn't tell you when we first started using them.
Right.
I've seen some fantastic aerial photography using drones. And we have kind of integrated in-house media and communication services. So we kind of produce all that stuff in-house. So there's been quite a lot of close working between kind of project teams and then our experts in kind of media services, photography and video and so on, as well as the technical people who are responsible for maintaining the data sets and the information and developing the ways that we can model things. So some really interesting stuff there, and I'm too much of a geek to spend more than a kind of passing mention, really. Otherwise I would just get sucked into the detail and not do the day job.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
I was going to ask anybody else on the call for their observations. Mark, is this a kind of environment that you recognise? Obviously, BBC, that's very different from a infrastructure construction environment, but the sort of challenges that and the solutions that Martin's describing.
Yes, I mean, we're not on the supplier side, so we don't get so much involved with that. We do still have a few construction projects. So we've got the long-running E20, which is the rebuild of the EastEnders set in Elstree, which has its own challenges, not least from the recent restrictions on building sites in London, etc. There's another project moving the orchestras from Maida Vale to Stratford, to the Olympic Park there again. So a lot of projects we're interested in the sort of the finished building, and we're looking to broadcast from there or use that for other operations, etc. So a lot of our complexity comes from, you know, building being fit for purpose, changing operating models, that kind of thing. So, you know, in the environment today, of course, every organization, you know, with 90% of its staff at home is wondering whether the buildings that it's already got, as well as the ones it's got under construction, are really going to be fit for purpose. Is the operating model going to work? And of course, we've got a lot of people in the BBC working out how they can do broadcasting both within the existing buildings and with their home setups and that sort of thing. So that's where our sort of complexity, if you like, comes from.
Yeah, excellent. One of the questions I wanted to throw at you, Martin, was and indeed anybody else on the call, was the tension between a project and the project organisation. Because when I've come across the kind of iconic examples of projects that were very collaborative. I'm thinking of things like the bank station renovation project. They seem to have been an extraordinary moment of time, and the culture, the collaborative culture, doesn't seem to have survived the ending of the completion of the project. So people talk about that. So it's fantastic, but TfL don't seem to be adopting it on other projects, and I don't know whether that's because the other projects actually don't have the same level of complexity, or indeed the challenge is the fact that you create a culture within a given project, which is quite hard to sustain on, you know, another project.
That's a really interesting question. I was kind of partly kind of reflecting on what Mark has said around kind of fit for purpose, and thinking about how the same kind of challenges apply to us in the road sector. We need to design safer roads, more environmentally friendly roads. We have a requirement across this road investment period of ensuring that we leave the environment around our network in a better state than we found it, which is going to be very challenging for some parts of our network. I guess there's a couple of things. I would certainly be curious to understand what investment Transport for London might have made around trying to take the lessons out of that particular scheme around collaboration. How much of that was the people in the organisation? How much of that was investing in behaviours? How much of that was in other things like systems? How much of that was driven externally by the ways they needed to engage with customers, supply chain, all the rest of it? I don't know, but I'd be really interested to kind of say, well, what did you do to try and pull the stuff out of that allowed you to say, even if we have other schemes which are far less complex or less demanding in terms of the footprint of the site, in terms of the people involved, the engineering challenges, whatever else, why would you not want to try and replicate that collaborative piece?
Yes,
because absolutely, it just makes so much of a difference to your experience as a project professional. It makes you more likely to want to come in and do a great job, to look out for your team, and for your team to be that wider integrated team, to keep everyone safe, to keep everyone motivated and engaged, and to capture the ideas and the innovation and the challenge from everyone.
Yes.
So I'd be really interested to understand what they did or didn't do. Was it they tried and they failed, or they left it too late, or they didn't spot the opportunity at the right time? I don't know.
Yeah. Did you want to chip in there?
Yes.
I think I've got, well, personally, perhaps, and quite cynically, a very simple answer to that one, and that is that people trust people, organisations don't trust organisations. I think, whenever we've all been, hopefully we've all been in that perfect storm of positive collaboration and that a positive cycle. I suspect we've also been in the opposite at times too. And I think if you're talking about those where it does work, it does come down to those individual relationships and that building of trust.
Yes.
And the ability of a small number, hopefully of the right people at the right levels in the organisation, to demonstrate that trust both to each other and to the wider team. I think the difficulty is inherently, as you just said, Martin, the ability to embed that into the institution, into the framework, is very difficult.
Yes. Yeah. I that's a really interesting point, Al. I mustn't confuse causation and correlation, but there does seem to be, whenever I come across a case study like this, there do seem to be some big personalities, some people who seem to be associated with enabling the collaboration. Neil, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what's just been said, really. I've had experience myself prior to my life at BRE, working in a number of joint ventures on schemes like Crossrail and highway schemes like the M1 Junction 6A to 10 widening, which goes back a few years now. And I would agree that it was the people, that those joint ventures that I worked on that were successful. It was purely down to the people that made it successful, fostering the collaborative culture and atmosphere, and making everyone feel like they were all in it to achieve the same goals, rather than a far more adversarial, old school contractual setup. And I think, coming back to the way Martin was talking about the A14, I was involved at tender stage before it moved into that kind of integrated project delivery partner, when it was very much a packaged up, more traditional delivery model, if you like. And I think the alliance model has been seen to work on some major schemes that Network Rail have implemented it on. And it would be great to think that the success of the A14, and I'm sure there are things that we're not aware of being on the outside that haven't gone quite so well, but it would be great to think that, you know, the positive lessons from this different model and what we can learn in terms of procurement for other major projects and other major programs, what we can learn from it. But I completely agree with what Al was saying. For me, it comes down to the people at the top of those organisations, and particularly project level people organisationally, not necessarily the CEOs, but the project directors.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think just if I can just come back on that, and then I'll stop and let somebody else come in. But the people are enabled by the right framework, not necessarily the way around. I think, so if you've got good leadership and good, collaborative behaviours, then it does help. It makes that easier if there's the right systems, structures, processes, behavioural frameworks in place. But those frameworks in their own right don't build a collaborative organisation without the people with the right attitude.
Yes. When from what I understand of the bank station redesign, they had the right people, and then they had, as you would say, some of the systems and the structure and the processes to support that. So they had a couple of fundamentals. One was that this was all at the design stage, and anybody submitting a tender for the design, even if they didn't then subsequently win the work, they would get paid for their ideas that they brought into the project. And the second was that because of the nature of the project, the bank being such a hugely complicated station, the one key element was they were looking for anything that would reduce the transit time for a passenger from one underground line to another. So it was very clear what the kind of key performance indicators, the key metrics were, and the design was all, they were looking for great ideas that would save time, and that was the kind of primary driver. So I think clearly having some of those very clear structures and processes in hand are pretty fundamental, so that people know what they're kind of working towards. Yeah. And any other thoughts from the other speakers on the, or other listeners on the conversation?
Jonathan, it's John here again. I went to a presentation when the bank project started, and they said just what you've identified there. There were very senior people involved in that project from TfL who were able to change the behaviours and defend the project, not have an adversarial relationship. They also said that when they went out to the supply chain, they requested individuals who could work in a collaborative basis and weren't old school, see how much we can have a fight out of this. It was both parties had to come to the table with that in mind. And that was an interesting perspective. You needed a very senior person to be able to defend that as an approach, and you needed a supply chain who could engage in that way.
Interesting. I suspect that they must also, when it came to the kind of contracting, they must have also continued that into the contract to make it work. But yeah,
you have to align the contract to the behaviours, to the delivery framework. Otherwise, you're setting the project or the team up for confrontation, and that's not where you want to start.
Which is exactly what we're trying to do in RIS2 with our commercial arrangements. We've started doing it in the regional programs with delivery integration partners. We have just started the process to implement the same in the Smart Motorways program. And as I said, the kind of complex infrastructure schemes have all got their bespoke arrangement, but around that same kind of alliancing model. It's just variations that work well for both the kind of project and the people involved in it. And you're absolutely right. You have to hear that from the top. The people at the top have to take ownership. This is how we're going to do it. We all need to be on board and signed up to that, because if we're not, it won't work well.
I think for me that brings to bear another key role, which we we talk about in passing, but I don't think we really focus on. We talk a lot about project directors and project leaders, but I think the role and the dynamic between the project director and the program sponsor is absolutely critical. And it's the sponsor that often has to take the lead in setting some of these contacts and behaviours, not just the project director.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder again. Since we got Mark on the call, I'm interested in the difference between kind of linear infrastructure and the kind of work that you're doing, Mark. I mean, there are certain things that I imagine that when Highways England are planning a road, you know, the route is all defined up front, because you can't suddenly decide, oh, we're just going to change direction. And so the sort of beginning and the end are really defined. Whereas, you know, in some of the programs that you were describing, Mark, that there may be different ways of skinning a cat. And I don't know whether your approach to the programs allows you to kind of have a general direction and then actually gather the detail and identify a final solution as you're going, or does that all have to be completely nailed down before you start?
So like all major project organizations, it depends on the type of project. So yes, most of the buildings type projects will follow the classic REBA sort of waterfall model. With IT projects and software development projects, so things like iPlayer or the provisions of new scheduling systems for programs or for people, etc., they will invariably, they may have a sort of a supplier provided IT element that may have some waterfall in it, but typically they'll be run as agile projects. So they will have, you know, technical spikes at the beginning to look at areas of unknowns and risks and that sort of thing. They'll be looking to deliver incrementally something that the business can use and give feedback on. So run things as a pilot in a particular division. They'll be looking to roll out things to the audience, doing A/B testing. So, you know, some of the audience will see one new version, another part of the audience might see another new version, and we'll get feedback, and then they'll iterate on the design or the user interface or whatever based on that feedback. So that's very much the model within the BBC, to use those kinds of approaches. And like other organisations, you know, the challenges are scaling that up. We know, you know, it's fairly easy to do that with small development teams. It's when you're working with very large teams or collections of agile teams where you're actually trying to coordinate those things and make sure it all actually fits together at the various tranches of delivery. Yeah, then it becomes more interesting.
Yeah.
Mark, can I ask a follow-on question? Thinking at this from a portfolio perspective, which is obviously where you sit, what do you see being the key causes of complexity in your organisation?
A lot of it comes from stakeholders. So both within the organisation, the BBC obviously is built around areas such as news and sport and content divisions like television and radio, online, etc. So those people will know their audiences quite well, but they have completely different views of what the value of those audiences are, etc. Clearly there are touch points like young audiences, that sort of thing. So a lot of the complexity will be around satisfying diverse stakeholders. Clearly there's complexity from the marketplace. So, you know, competing with the FANGs, for instance. So as that marketplace develops, usually quite rapidly, and much more rapidly than an organisation like the BBC, which has got, of course, not just a legacy of customers and products, but has this universality. So we can't do things just for a small part of the audience. We have to do things that are available to everyone. So, you know, it's trying to juggle those things. I think that's where a lot of the complexity comes from.
Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Good. So I'll just check the chat, see if we've got any other questions before we move on. No, good. Martin, I wanted to throw in another question, which was really the danger of when you're addressing complexity, and you're thinking about things like collaboration and different behaviors and innovation, and is there a balance? And if so, you may not be able, there may not be a rule to this, but is there a balance between knowing that you're adapting with a purpose, with a given purpose, and you're actually managing the complexity, and actually all you're doing is adding more vegetables to the soup, and making the problem worse?
Life's a balancing act, I think, is the short answer. My assumption would be that by default, you're always going to end up adding some complexity regardless of your intentions, simply by engaging with and looking at how you can kind of use different levers to, can we do more of that, less of that? Can we do it like this? What if we try that? How if we pilot it there? And particularly in an organization which historically, yes, kind of most of what we do is through that kind of large structured waterfall approach. We have a lot of governance that sits around what we do. So there's kind of formal change control, investment decision committee kind of checkpoints, independent assurance from government. So everything that we do to try and move something to a better place almost certainly is going to add some complexity and some complicatedness. And is also going to potentially have some impacts on things that we don't anticipate as well as we would like to, just by the nature of the organization. But it's a bit like kind of, if you don't try it, then you'll never find out. Yes. And I have to say, some of this is a kind of preference thing for me. So my kind of area of expertise, rather than project delivery, is much more around change management. That's where my kind of formal qualifications and a lot of my experience, not just here, but in other functions like HR, sit. So how will people engage with this? How will people use it? How will they use it and subvert it in ways that you don't expect them to? Yes. That's the interesting and the challenging stuff, and that's where some of the complexity for us comes. We can implement new systems and get them to talk to each other with quite a lot of focus and hard work, I have to say, because there are no systems out there in the marketplace that talk comfortably to each other, even when you need them to. But then thinking about the ways that people decide not to use those systems or use them in ways you didn't intend. And I'm just kind of following the example because I see it quite often. When we implemented Primavera kind of across the piece, we had a number of technical issues around implementing it and getting it to work properly, because our kind of legacy IT estate is civil service, so everything was locked down to the nth degree. We're operating in a more commercial environment, so we need to make more pragmatic decisions, but still protecting the safety of our data and property. But the piece that kind of didn't get a lot of attention for me at that point in time was looking at what people really did in the real workplace and saying, well, how can you do this easier or better or possibly the same in Primavera? Yeah. And if there's a gap between what you do now and how you do it and why you do it and what we need you to do, are we really spending some time listening to what your concerns are, watching what your practice is, and then thinking about how we best encourage and help you? So there's a lot of carrot rather than just a bit of stick or a bit of here it is, good luck. Yes. Which I've certainly seen in the past in other organisations. And I think that's where some of this danger comes. Yes, we're always going to add some additional complicatedness or complexity. But if we don't spend that piece of time on understanding how people want to use it or understanding what they do now and how we might need to help them move to using the system that we need them to use now in a way that we need them to use it, and how they can see the benefits. So that's again about kind of, what's the common goal here? What outcomes are we trying to achieve? And unless some of that is about making our lives easier or safer, yes, as well as the business imperatives around kind of making sure our customers are better understood and served, that we spend yes. public money more wisely, yes. then I'm going to be out of a job, basically. So it's in my interests to pay attention to this stuff, because this is some of the stuff where we learn some real lessons. If you like doing it like that and it works well, yes. then how can we kind of make sure that what we need you to do in the future still hits those kind of pleasure centres? A comms colleague said this to me in a very kind of simple way that I really liked. We use Yammer as a kind of internal social media channel. There's a huge amount of noise and chaos because lots of people have different ways of using it. And kind of digital comms said to me basically, well, if you've got lots of people posting pictures of cats, which they do,
Yes.
don't moan about people posting pictures of cats. Think about how you can use posting pictures of cats to get a different message across about something that's important to you.
Yes.
So you're using a medium that they are already using and engaged with, and they've done that off their own back. We didn't ask them to set up a cat lovers group and a dog lovers group, but they have.
Yes. Yeah. I'm just, you know, the kind of idea of cats and road safety. It's not a happy sort of happy
No.
sort of model, but there we go.
I'm surprised you haven't had my cat on the so far already. Hashtag cats on keyboards is a thing on Twitter apparently at the moment.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Well,
yeah.
as I was saying that, I think this is where my cats wake up and decide that they want to come and sit on my keyboard or something.
Yes, yes, yeah. Good. I'm just going to, before we kind of ask you just to say a final couple of words, Martin, any observations that you'd like to, I'm just going to scoot around the room and invite anybody in turn to add an observation, a question, any other thoughts, any final thoughts before we kind of close. So I'll start. What is the bottom right of my screen? Probably not for you, which is Timothy's iPad. I'm not sure who that is, but did you want to offer any comment or question before we kind of finish? Okay.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, please do.
Yes. I find a good solution for complexity is to divide the project into smaller areas or smaller projects and assign these smaller projects to different groups. Is it a good solution for complexity in your opinion?
Ooh. I don't know is the simple answer. I think to some extent that would be very difficult for us. So we do have programs of work and a number of kind of projects that have been kind of managed within that program. Breaking it down into smaller bits, we have started some of the conversations around, as part of our kind of workforce planning and professional development, are there opportunities for different people to be involved? What's the optimum kind of skill set capability for different phases of the life cycle? So looking at projects across the life cycle and saying, have you got the right people at each phase? And if not, what do you do about that in terms of recruitment, upskilling, etc.? But in terms of breaking them down into smaller components, the challenge we have is that we need to deliver a lot more with the same number or less people. And you'd add a layer of organizational complexity, I think, if you started thinking about how you break things down differently, unless you do it in a very clear and obvious way. So it's something that I'd want to go away and think about and think, is there something to learn from that or not? And would it fit within our systems? The risk, I guess, which is a risk of thinking about the level of capability and capacity at each stage and potentially moving people around or changing teams, is that you then start to threaten potentially some of that trust, resilience, collaborative behavior and environment that you've been building up in a team. And so there's going to be some trade-offs there. If you start to play around with the people on the project for whatever reasons, you run the risk of compromising or changing the culture and the behavior. And it depends whether that's something you're prepared to live with and address or not. But it's an interesting question. I don't know the answer.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you. Thank you.
Manuel, did you want to chip in here with any questions or observations?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I just wanted to bring in a slightly different perspective from my point of view. I've always been involved in change skill training, stage performance, and completely different world. But I've been supporting projects in change management. But as someone mentioned earlier on, the kind of intangibles, right? Collaborations. We need to make it work and kind of have a framework that actually lays it out for us. One of the things that I found is that sometimes in a project delivery setting, we've got 6 months, we've got 12 months, 18 months to deliver a piece of work. I think I'm not a big fan of like mindsets and metaphors and things like that, but I think there is two parts to that. There is the building the bicycle, building the tool, the Office 365, digital change, digital transformation, a dashboard. And that's something you can do. You've got more people on it, and then they basically assemble different pieces of the technology, they develop it and all of that, and you can do it quicker. I think when we talk about people's skills and intangible, this is more like the metaphor of the mechanical doesn't apply anymore. You see with people on stage performing, for example, I'm a big fan of improvised comedy, right? Where everything is soft skill training. But I think people and collaboration is an organic growth. It's like a plant, right? So you can't, and you want to have people on board. If you want people utilizing the system the best possible way, it has to start alongside the project. On one hand, you're watering a plant. On the other hand, you're building a bicycle. But because it's about people, I don't know the answer to all of these questions. I'm kind of putting forward this perspective whereby I wish I had a kind of behavioral framework. I love, I think there is a set of skills that are particularly contextual to the project delivery. And I started listing out a few of them. This is that type of work I do. But I just wanted to offer this different perspective where the closest I can think of developing these types of skills is training, is coaching, but do it in a structural way that is contextual to the project delivery. And I believe it is possible to have a high-performing team, very collaborative, that was applied to a project, and then have that type of personal growth or professional. These are the top 6 skills used to develop and apply to a different project to have a similar kind of performance. So sorry, I don't mean to kind of hijack. I just wanted to kind of put forward a slightly different perspective on things from a different world.
Yeah, thank you. That was tremendous. And despite your reticence about metaphors, you you had no problem piling them on. It was wonderful. I'm a great fan of metaphors. So thank you. Leslie, you've been quiet up to now. Any thoughts? Any feedback you want to give Martin on his performance? Or
I think we'll do that afterwards. Really interesting discussion, and yes, there are some things from other people's contributions that I'm sure Martin, Joe, and myself will discuss later and mull over those thoughts and how we can use them. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Good. We've got sort of 2 minutes to go. Martin, any final reflection?
I suppose my kind of final reflection, kind of reflecting on what people have said and asked, really is that there's some really interesting stuff that people have said that I haven't particularly thought about in the same way at all. And there's a couple of references in the kind of chat function I can see now as well. So my kind of parting shot basically would be, don't be afraid to kind of get involved in the messy stuff, because it is interesting. And I think sometimes it is, oh, well, if this is complex, then we better not do it, or we better find a way to do it that controls it. And still with pride. I don't believe in reinventing the wheel. My mantra is still with pride. So I'm definitely going to steal some of the stuff that I've heard today from people and think about how we can apply it here, because I'm sure it will help us. And similarly, if people want to come back to me after this and kind of ask about stuff, I've posted a link to an article about IBIP. It doesn't give you the framework, but it does give you a bit more information about what IBIP is. It's a cross-sector body, not a Highways England specific body, and part of that collaboration is about having coaches and practitioners across our supply chain rather than just in Highways England. So thank you everyone for joining and for all the kind of things that you've asked and that you've shared. I've got a lot to think about and some stuff to definitely steal and reapply here. Brilliant.
Yeah. Well, Martin, thank you ever so much. It's been tremendous. Really great conversation. And works so well alongside your blog, which has also been great. So thank you, and thanks to everybody on the call. We do this occasionally, and I encourage our bloggers, our guest bloggers, to do this, and we'll continue to do so. Just throw in this kind of hour-long conversation around the theme of the blogger, because it's an opportunity really to kind of chew over ideas and try and get them in our heads and kind of assimilate the learning. So thank you all very much. Do let me have any feedback on the call and how it was for you, and I'll hopefully see you next time.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you,
Martin.
Jonathan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a
You're
lot. It was
welcome.
very
Thanks, Arena.
interesting. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Jonathan, does the kind of chat get saved as well as the actual recording itself? Or do I want to kind of select some of this now and just stuck it in a document so I can follow the links?
I have saved the chat. I believe. Let me just have a look. Let's see where I've saved it. Yeah, I asked it to save the chat, so I think it's just a case of finding it. But I with luck, I have saved the chat as well.
It's just there were some useful references and a couple of links in there. I thought I definitely want to go and have a look at that afterwards and see,
yes,
kind of what the detail tells me.
Yeah, definitely. But thanks again. That was tremendous, Martin. How was it for you? Perhaps I should.
I had no idea where it was going to go. I think we went off on some very interesting tangents. I didn't expect there to be quite so much focus on the behavioural stuff.
Yes.
But I think it was the right kind of tangent to go down, because a lot of innovation, a lot of kind of ways to better understand and better engage with the environment we're in come from that collaborative behaviour. If we don't have honest conversations with each other, if we don't trust each other to kind of listen properly, and more importantly, if we don't feel safe to kind of talk about the stuff that we messed up or found difficult or stressful, then we're going to miss lots of opportunities to better understand and better deal with the complicated and the complex.
Yes, yeah, very good.
So it's even though I didn't know where it was going to go, it went somewhere really interesting, and it kind of helped me clarify some of my ideas as well as give me some references to go and explore. So I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great thing to do.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I was introduced it by Todd Phillips, who was an American author who blogged for us last year sometime. And he said, "Oh, do you want to do a Zoom live as part of my?" And I thought, "Oh, yeah, okay, why not? Let's see what happens." And it's a really great. It definitely adds an interesting additional level to what you can do with the blogging. It's a very useful thing. And I'm a great fan. I firmly believe in sort of conversational leadership and learning out loud. So the value of conversation, I think, is tremendous. Yeah.
Well, I'm someone who prefers to talk things through, because you end up with those kind of epiphanies where someone says something and you connect to it in a way that you didn't expect, and you come up with something completely new. I used to manage our internal webinar program, a Learn at Lunch program. That was more of a kind of presentation and cascade, but you spend about 20 minutes in presentation and then probably about 20 minutes Q&A.
Yes.
And it does work really well.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, thank you ever so much, and thanks, Marina, for joining us.
Thanks a lot. I want to say something before we close.
Please do.
I think a good word to summarize dealing with complexity is to create balance between all stakeholders, all aspects of the project. When we create this balance, I think we will mitigate complexity. This is what I think.
Yeah.
I like that. That word balance is a really good one, isn't it? And a lot of what we do is a balancing act, but it's finding the right balance between those different kind of things.
Yes.
I don't know if we ever keep it or find it for long, but finding it is interesting, and it does give us better outcomes. So yeah, thank you.